This fiction is rated T, which is the same as a PG-13 rating. This fiction is suitable for teens 13 years and older, with some violence and minor coarse language. For more information, please see the fanfiction.net fiction rating guidelines. Hermione's Song. This story is a work of fanfiction written by Patrick Mallard that takes place after the Doctor Who episode A Good Man Goes to War and during Hermione Granger's 6th year at Hogwarts. All rights to Doctor Who and Harry Potter belong to their respective owners. The Series 5 Doctor Who theme was written and conducted by Murray Gold and performed by the BBC Orchestra of Wales. The song Travelling Man was written by Alex Day and performed by his band Chameleon Circuit. No profit is being made from this story. Chapter 1. Demon's Run. Rory and Amy Pond, Rory finally giving in and taking Amy's last name, stared at the spot where the TARDIS had been just a moment earlier. They shared a look of shock thanks to the Doctor leaving without them. Riversong put her hand on Rory's shoulder.
"It's all right. Things have to happen this way,"
she assured him. Rory put his hand on Rivers. He was still having a hard time coming to grips with the fact that the adult woman standing in front of him was in fact his infant daughter who had just been stolen from them less than an hour ago. He shook his head to clear his thoughts of timey-wimey things, as the Doctor put it. "How can you be so sure?" he asked his daughter, who physically was at least 10 years older than him. River smiled knowingly at her parents, and then looked back at where the TARDIS had been.
"I was there, remember?"
she asked rhetorically.
"He's about to find me again,"
she said, her eyes twinkling.
"Oh, the adventures that man and I have had. Will have. Damn, English just doesn't have the right tenses to describe things like that," she chuckled. Amy knew that time travelers rarely gave her a straight answer when she asked about things that dealt with her own timeline, but she had to ask River anyway. She had to know that her little girl was going to be okay. "What happens when he finds you?"
she begged. River looked at her mother, her smile somewhere between wistful and somewhat naughty.
"That's when I fell in love with him, of course," she said softly.
Hogwarts School for Witchcraft and Wizardry. Hermione Granger sat in the Gryffindor common room on one of the oversized couches near the fireplace. She was reading one of the numerous books about magical history that had been assigned for her 6th year. Her feet were drawn up under her, and she absent-mindedly stroked her cat Crookshanks with her free hand. She had forgone the school uniform for the night, and was lounging in her favorite pink sweatshirt and blue jeans. The book she was engrossed in dealt with Merlin and his actions concerning the Arthurian court. Ron Weasley walked down the stairs with his favorite wizard chess set tucked under one arm. He was wearing one of the loose-fitting sweaters his mother knitted for every member of the family. His had a large letter R on the front. Brushing his long red hair out of his eyes, he glanced down at Hermione and saw what she was reading. He gave her an exaggerated sigh to draw her attention. "Typical Hermione," he said in a patronizing voice, rolling his eyes. "You do realize we don't have a test on that book until after Christmas break, don't you?" he asked.
Just because I want to get ahead on the reading material instead of wasting my time playing wizard's chess doesn't give you the right to tease me, Ronald Weasley,"
Hermione said angrily. She was still a little miffed about seeing him snogging with Luna Lovegood near the Quidditch locker rooms. Hermione would never admit it, but she harbored a crush on her longtime friend. Ron never was one able to take a hint, no matter how it was presented. He started to say something more about her study habits, but was interrupted by their best friend Harry Potter making his way down the stairs. Ron pounced on the opportunity to show Hermione he wasn't the only one who thought her study habits daft. "Harry, what's more important, reading a book that we won't be tested on until Christmas, or blowing off steam with a nice friendly game of chess?" he asked the dark-haired boy. Harry stopped on the last step before entering the common room. He spun on his heel and started walking back up to the room he shared with Ron and Neville Longbottom. "I may be prone to adventure, and have a habit of leaping before I look, but even I know not to get involved in this discussion," he said with a smirk. He made it a few steps when Hermione sat straight up, letting her book slide to the floor. Her eyes had a glassy, faraway look. "Hermione!" Harry and Ron yelled together. Harry leapt down the remainder of the stairs and ran to Hermione's side. Ron took up a position on Hermione's other side and put his hand on her shoulder. "Hermione, can you hear us?" Ron asked, concern softening his voice. Hermione blinked her eyes several times and shook like she was waking up.
"That was weird,"
she said simply. Ron looked at Harry and rolled his eyes. "What happened?" Harry asked, trying not to laugh at Ron's expression. Hermione blushed slightly in embarrassment.
I'm not really sure,
she replied.
It felt like someone poured ice water down the back of my robe,
she tried to explain. Do you want us to take you to Madame Pomfrey? Ron offered. Hermione blanched.
No, I'm all right,
she said quickly. Hermione decided to throw the argument she had been having with Ron to distract him.
I must have got a muscle spasm from reading in this couch too much, I suppose,
she said. See, I told you something like that would happen. No good can ever come from studying too much, Ron said, trying to sound wise. Hermione gave Harry a weak smile, and he nodded in understanding. There had been several times when the connection he shared with Voldemort had sent him into much worse fits. Come on, Ron. I'll play you in chess. Seems like a good preventative to me. I don't want a sore back, he said, covering for Hermione. Hermione watched her two best friends setting up the board and laying out the pieces. She was glad that neither of them had pried. However, she knew that at some point she would have to talk to Harry about things. Hermione wasn't even sure how to explain what she had experienced after the shock. She was never one to put any credence into predictions or premonitions, but she had the uncanny feeling that someone important was coming to Hogwarts. Inside the TARDIS. The Doctor was nearly dancing around the center console of his TARDIS in glee. The word in Galfrain etched onto his old bassinet, along with the knowledge that Melody Pond was going to be all right, made him almost giddy. In fact, to him, Melody was going to be more than just all right. She was going to be River Song. His merry mood evaporated, however, when he heard the resonating sound of the cloister bell ringing. Oh, now what? He demanded from the universe. He manically dashed from panel to panel of the hexagonal control console in an effort to determine what was cataclysmically wrong this time. The Doctor was thrown into the railing as the TARDIS began to lurch in odd directions, making it difficult for the Doctor to stay on his feet. He steadied himself with a hand on the time rotor once he found the scanner he was looking for. That is very not good, he muttered to himself when he looked at the readout. The temporal scanners showed that he was headed for a whirling maelstrom inside the vortex, the dimension surrounding and running through the physical one he normally inhabited. Storms in the vortex were a rarity, but when they did appear, they grew to enormous size and were capable of tossing a time capsule very far off its intended course. To top things off, this particular storm was full of energy discharges streaking from one side to the other in the gigantic cloud. The Doctor frantically scanned the storm, looking for a way to avoid becoming temporal flotsam. The storm was too big to fly around, but he thought that he might be able to pilot the TARDIS into the relative calm in the eye of the storm. He spun knobs, flipped switches, and cranked gears as he steered the TARDIS towards the eye of the cosmic storm, hoping to keep the TARDIS together. The TARDIS was almost at the eye of the storm when one of the dangerous energy bolts struck it dead on. Sparks flew from the console, and a lesser energy bolt arced out of the time rotor to strike the Doctor in the chest. A bright flash of light was the last thing the Doctor remembered before going unconscious. The next thing the Doctor was aware of was pain throughout his body. He felt like he had tried to run a marathon on a planet with a gravity equal to Jupiter's. Needless to say, moving wasn't at the top of his priority list at the moment. He made a valiant effort and managed to open his eyes. Judging by the angle from which he was looking at the time rotor, the Doctor figured out he was laying flat on his back. He wondered, not for the first time, if he shouldn't put something down softer than transparent aluminum as a floor for the raised catwalk surrounding the center console. He rubbed his eyes and reached up to the hexagonal console to pull himself into a sitting position. Once he was more or less upright, The doctor checked over his clothes to see if they had been damaged in the blast. He glanced at his dark trousers, cream-colored shirt, and tan tweed jacket. His free hand went up to his neck to assure himself that his precious bow tie was still intact. Taking a deep breath and forcing his muscles to cooperate, he managed to stand, but still felt every 911 years in his bones. When his vision finally stopped swimming, the doctor noticed the time rotor had gone still, indicating they had landed somewhere. He slid over to the next panel and looked at the spatial, temporal alignment grid. "All right, Sexy, where did we end up this time?" he asked the time rotor. The scanners had been knocked out of alignment, but the doctor was fairly certain the TARDIS had activated its default emergency landing sequence and plopped him down on Earth. He was able to narrow the location a bit and sighed deeply in relief when he saw they were in London. The last thing he needed at that moment was another adventure in the States. He rotated the dial of the scanner 90 degrees so he could figure out when he was. The temporal portion of the scanner had been knocked so far out of whack that he was only able to determine they were some when after the fall of the Roman Empire. The doctor straightened up from crouching over the controls and tugged on his bow tie. "Right. Time for a little walk to figure out when we are," he told the TARDIS. He pressed down on the button that opened the doors to the physical world and made his way outside. As soon as he was out the doors, the doctor turned around and locked them without paying too much attention to his surroundings. When he turned around again, he was greeted by a rather confusing sight. The TARDIS had materialized in the mouth of a dingy alley. The buildings lining the street in front of him had been built with absolutely no sense of uniformity. Their styles ranged from early Greek stonework to late Victorian elegance and everything in between. Like any populated area, people were busy going about their business and ignoring the TARDIS. Though the fashions displayed on the people differed as much as the architecture, they were all wearing some type of robe. The doctor whipped out his sonic screwdriver, held out his hand, and spun around in a quick circle. When he finished spinning, the doctor held the screwdriver in front of his face so that he could see the readings. Pollution levels in the air showed that he was in London, 1996. A familiar scent wafted over to the doctor, interrupting his thoughts. He followed the scent until he stopped in front of Florian Fortescue's ice cream parlor. "Well, if they have sweets, they can't be all bad," he reassured himself. The doctor made his way into the shop and began the extremely difficult task of choosing which flavor he wanted. He didn't notice the pair of men wearing black robes headed to the shop as well. Had the doctor been able to see under their sleeves, he would have seen matching tattoos of a skull with a snake coming out of its mouth on their forearms.